When Emperor Basil II died in 1025, the Byzantine Empire still looked strong. Its frontiers had largely stabilized. In the Balkans, imperial arms had restored Roman authority. In the east, forts had been repaired, garrisons had been rebuilt, and the empire still appeared capable of defending itself. But appearances can be deceptive. In the decades after Basil's death, the empire passed through a long stretch of weak or contested rule. Court politics deepened, rival factions grew stronger, military resources were strained. By the time Romanos IV Diogenes came to the throne in 1068, the Byzantine state still possessed wealth, prestige, and memory. But its ability to respond quickly and decisively was slipping away. Romanos was not a ceremonial emperor. He was a soldier. He had come to power believing that the empire could still recover if its rulers acted with energy and resolve. The greatest danger, in his eyes, stood on the eastern frontier, where Seljuk Turkish raiding and expansion had become a growing threat to Byzantine control in Armenia and eastern Anatolia. Romanos led campaigns eastward and managed a few limited successes. Yet the larger problem remained. The frontier was under pressure, and the empire needed more than a temporary reprieve. Across that frontier stood Sultan Alp Arslan, ruler of the Seljuk Empire. He too was an able commander. But in the years before Manzikert, he was not focused solely on Byzantium. His attention was also drawn southward, especially towards Syria and the struggle involving the Fatimids. For that reason, diplomacy between the Byzantines and the Seljuks did not simply vanish. There were truces, negotiations, and attempts to manage the border. In fact, Romanos sent envoys again in 1071, likely hoping to secure peace long enough to recover the lost fortresses around Lake Van. But while diplomacy continued on the surface, both sides were already moving toward war. Romanos assembled a large army for the 1071 campaign, but it was not a simple or unified force. It included Byzantine regulars, provincial troops, Armenian and Balkan soldiers, the Varangian Guard, and various foreign mercenaries and allied horsemen. Such armies could be formidable. They could also be fragile. They spoke different languages. They followed different commanders. Their loyalty varied. Their discipline varied even more. For an older empire under strain, this mattered. A mixed army can win a battle if it is held together firmly. But once confusion spreads, cracks open quickly. The march east did not go smoothly. At one stage, Romanos dismissed some of his Frankish mercenaries after disorder and plundering among the local population. By June 1071, he reached Theodosiopolis, where he had to resupply, review his position, and decide how to proceed. Some advisors favored a more cautious strategy. Others wanted a deeper offensive. Romanos chose to move forward. That decision was understandable. A large army could not remain in one place forever. Supplies would run out. Delay could become its own form of defeat. But Romanos was making decisions with imperfect information, and in this campaign, imperfect information would prove fatal. He seems to have believed that Alp Arslan was farther away than he really was. That assumption led to one of the most important decisions of the campaign. Romanos divided his army. One major force, under Joseph Tashaniotes, was sent toward Kliat, while the emperor advanced on Manzikert with the rest. The exact movements of Tarchanaiotes remain debated, and the sources do not agree on every detail. What is clear is that this force never returned in time to support Romanos in the main battle. That absence mattered enormously. Alp Arslan, by contrast, moved quickly and with clarity. Once he understood that the Byzantine army had been divided, he shifted from caution to opportunity. This was one of the strengths of steppe warfare: mobility, scouting, flexibility, and the ability to exploit a mistake before the enemy fully understood it had made one. The Seljuk army was built around mounted troops, especially horse archers, supported by heavier cavalry. It was not designed to absorb punishment in a rigid frontal collision with Byzantine heavy infantry. It was designed to stretch, harass, isolate, and break an enemy's cohesion. As the campaign neared its climax, the Byzantines began encountering Seljuk forces in a series of unsettling clashes. What looked at first like raiding parties or forward screens turned out to be signs that the Seljuk army was much closer than Romanos had expected. During this phase, some of the empire's Turkic auxiliaries and mercenaries became unreliable. Some were thrown into confusion. Some may have deserted. These details vary by source, but the general picture is consistent. Before the main battle even began, the Byzantine army was already losing some of its internal cohesion. Then came the decisive day, August 26, 1071. Romanos deployed his men in a broad formation near Manzikert. He commanded the center. The Byzantine line was arranged for a conventional battle, the kind in which disciplined heavy troops could hold formation, advance steadily, and eventually force a decisive engagement. Alp Arslan did not give him that battle. Instead, the Seljuks withdrew gradually, while showering the Byzantine line with arrows and drawing it farther out. This was not a panicked retreat. It was a controlled, elastic defense, meant to wear down the enemy and provoke disorder. The longer the Byzantines advanced, the more exposed they became to harassment, fatigue, and frustration. For the Byzantines, this was exactly the kind of fight they did not want. Their strength lay in cohesion, in disciplined infantry, in the shock value of heavy troops used at the right moment. But Romanos was short on effective missile support compared with the Seljuks, and his men were being drawn into a battle of movement rather than a battle of weight. The Seljuk horse archers kept their distance, struck where they could, and refused to be fixed in place. Bit by bit, they pulled the Byzantine army farther from security and deeper into a tactical position chosen by the Sultan. By late afternoon, Romanos faced a difficult reality. He had advanced far enough that remaining in place into the evening was dangerous. If darkness came while his army was still extended and exposed, the camp itself might be vulnerable. So he gave the order to turn back in good order and begin a controlled withdrawal. In theory, this was sensible. In practice, it was the most dangerous moment of the day. Turning a large army around under pressure is one of the hardest maneuvers in war. Doing it with a mixed force after hours of harassment was harder still. And at Manzikert, that moment of transition opened the door to disaster. As the Byzantine line began to reverse direction, the Seljuks struck hard. They attacked the wings. They widened confusion. Units that had already been strained began to lose alignment. One part of the Byzantine army started to give way, and once gaps appeared, Seljuk cavalry poured into them. Communication broke down. Formations drifted apart. The battlefield no longer obeyed the emperor's plan. This was the point at which a difficult retreat turned into a collapse. The role of Andronikos Doukas in this phase has long been controversial. Later, Byzantine tradition often accused him of abandoning the emperor, or at least failing to support him at the critical moment. Historians remain cautious about the exact wording of that charge, but there is no doubt that the imperial army did not receive the support it needed when the line was breaking apart. Whether through panic, calculation, factional hostility, or simple battlefield failure, the result was the same. Romanos was left dangerously exposed at the center. From there, the end came quickly. Parts of the Byzantine force fled toward the camp or toward Manzikert itself. Others disintegrated where they stood. Yet Romanos did not run at once. He stayed in the fight with those still around him, including elements of the Varangian Guard and other troops that remained loyal under impossible conditions. But courage at the center could not restore order to a battlefield already coming apart on every side. Romanos was wounded, unhorsed, and taken prisoner. With the emperor captured, the battle was over. The losses at Manzikert were serious, but historians are careful here. This was a major defeat, yet probably not the total physical annihilation that some later accounts suggest. Exact numbers remain uncertain. Some Byzantine forces escaped. Some formations had already become separated earlier in the campaign. Some chroniclers exaggerated both scale and drama. What mattered most was not only how many men died on the field, but what the defeat did to the political and military structure of the empire afterward. Romanos was then brought before Alp Arslan. The details of that meeting vary in the sources. Later narratives sometimes describe gestures of humiliation or ritual submission. Those stories cannot always be confirmed in every detail, and it is wise to be careful with them. What is more secure is this: the emperor was recognized, treated as a valuable captive rather than a common prisoner, and eventually released after terms were arranged. Alp Arslan had won a remarkable victory, but even he did not immediately gain everything that later generations would associate with Manzikert. The deeper disaster came afterward. Romanos did not return to a united empire ready to recover from defeat. He returned to political enemies, factional struggle, and a state already weakened from within. He was overthrown, blinded, and later died. Civil conflict followed. And it was in that atmosphere, more than in the battlefield defeat alone, that Byzantine authority in Anatolia began to unravel with alarming speed. Manzikert did not destroy Byzantium in a single day. Constantinople still stood. The empire still endured. But the battle, combined with the chaos that followed, opened the way for the long Seljuk advance into Anatolia. That is why Manzikert remained so powerful in memory. It was not simply a lost battle. Empires survive lost battles. It was a lost battle that exposed a deeper weakness: divided leadership, unreliable coordination, strained military institutions, and an emperor who could still fight bravely but could no longer rely on the full machinery of the state behind him. And that is what made the defeat so dangerous. The Byzantine Empire did not die at Manzikert. But after Manzikert, the empire could no longer assume that Anatolia, its great reservoir of land, manpower, and strategic depth, would remain securely in its hands. The psychological shock was immense. The political consequences were worse. And in the eyes of Latin Christendom, the old Eastern Empire no longer looked like the unshaken shield it had once seemed to be. In time, that shift would help shape the larger world that produced the First Crusade. In the end, Manzikert is remembered not only because an emperor was captured, but because the battle revealed how vulnerable a great power can become long before it fully understands its own weakness. Byzantium still had walls. It still had titles. It still had ceremony, history, and pride. But on that August day in 1071, it lost something harder to recover than soldiers. It lost control of the tempo. It lost confidence in the east. And little by little, it began to lose Anatolia. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. If you value clear, respectful history documentaries that take time to explain not just what happened, but why it mattered, please subscribe. And if you have your own view on Manzikert and its legacy, we would be glad to hear it in the comments.